Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Redwan again. He's back with a whole lot more stupid.
Meanwhile, people ignore some completely failed prophecies, such as Muhammad saying that Constantinople will be conquered by the Muslims, and then the end of the world will start soon. Constantinople was conquered in 1453 by the Muslim Ottomans and is now called Istanbul. Yes, it's true, I lived there. And guess what? The world is still spinning. But that's why they say now, well, it will be conquered again in the future, because meanwhile the Christians will conquer it back, and then we will conquer it again, and then the end will come. Of course. These Islamic fantasies are amazing.
No, Ridwan, all this is your demonstration of your lack of knowledge of Islamic and Judeo-Christian eschatology. In all traditions, almost all traditions, the concept of the last hour approaching soon is not limited to a specific time framework. The word soon could actually be applicable to even a period of 1,000 or a few thousand years, because the point of saying that these signs show that the hour is coming soon is not to say that the hour is going to start in 10 days or in 1 year or in 10 years. It's simply to point out the fact that when the hour is established, there is no running from it, and that the life that we lived in this world is going to seem like a day, as it is said in the Quran. Also, Ridwan, the idea of Constantinople being reconquered is not far-fetched for two simple reasons. Because, first of all, it is simply natural and absolutely possible for a state to lose control over a certain territory. So you can't say that this is a fantastical tale of the Muslims. Next, the hadiths that pertain to conquering Constantinople are of two types. One group of them pertains to Constantinople's conquering without mentioning the last days. The other group mentions the last days, which is an implication by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that there's two different types of conquests. And finally, in a hadith in the collection of Ibn Majah, we find a hadith that specifies the method by which Muslims will be conquering a city, which is tasbih and takbir. In other words, they're going to enter the city by simply saying Subhanallah and Allahu Akbar. And this is a valid opinion that many scholars held, that the Muslims will be peacefully entering the city, which means that this must be a different type of conquest, since we know that Muhammad Fatih II conquered it by force.
One day, a group of people came to Muhammad and asked him when the last hour is. Look what Muhammad said. A person asked Allah's apostle, when would the last hour come? Thereupon Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, kept quiet for a while. Then he looked at a young boy in his presence and said, if this boy lives, he would not grow very old till the last hour would come to you. So, Muhammad sees a little boy and says that if this boy lives, meaning if he makes it into adulthood, he won't grow very old, and Judgment Day will come. So this guy, if he survives, will witness Judgment Day before he grows too old. It could not be any clearer. This happened somewhere at the beginning of the 7th century. That kid is most definitely not alive. Muhammad gives a very clear answer, a hypothetical time at which that boy wouldn't be very old, on the question when the world will end. I know, you would think, this is as clear as it gets. How could anyone still object to this? But a common Muslim apologetic response, of course, is that he meant their last hour, as in the death of the person or the people who asked would come before the boy grows too old. But that is a very poor excuse, made out of desperation. The people clearly asked about the last hour, the end of the world. Why would Muhammad suddenly respond with their death instead?
So, I personally noticed one very sleazy and deceptive tactic that Ridwan uses. He tends to make an argument and then quote what we might say as a counter-argument to that, twists it, and then ridicules it to prevent us from replying in any way or shape or form. Now, I'm not going to fall for this, Ridwan, and this is why I mentioned this, so that people can see your type of sleaziness. Ridwan here quotes the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentions that the hour is going to be established, or that the hour is going to come near when this boy dies. But the Prophet ﷺ is definitely not talking about the day of judgment. He's talking about the hour of the people that he's addressing. And how do we know that? By reading the hadith that is right before the hadith that Ridwan is showing us, which says, Sa'atukum, your hour, which specifies that this boy's death is going to signify the hour of these people, of these Arabs, or the Ansars, or whatever. This is something that the Prophet ﷺ had as a custom. And then Ridwan asks us, okay, well, how come then the Prophet ﷺ, instead of answering to them, to their request to ask when the hour is going to happen, he says, your hour is going to happen at this time or that time? It is because the Prophet ﷺ is teaching people that it is useless to ask about when the day of judgment is going to occur, because we cannot know that. Even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself does not know that. So what he does is he teaches them when their last hour is going to occur, to remind them of death, because this is the only way they're going to prepare for it. In another hadith, a man asks the Prophet, when is the hour? And the Prophet ﷺ replies with, what have you prepared for it? So I really don't see what the problem is with this type of methodology, Ridwan.
Oh, thanks, Prophet, for not answering my question and talking about my death instead. And if all that is not enough, here is something even clearer. One night, Muhammad was leading the night prayer, and after he was done with the prayer, he said to his followers, "Do you realize the importance of this night? Nobody present on the surface of the earth tonight would be living after the completion of 100 years from this night." According to another report, I heard Allah's Messenger as saying this 1 month before his death. You asked me about the last hour, whereas its knowledge is with Allah. I, however, take an oath and say that none upon the earth of the created beings would survive at the end of 100 years. This is in numerous sources. Obviously, this hadith is very problematic because he clearly says that no one will survive the century, which means the world will end within 100 years, and he said that in 632 AD, yet nothing happened. That's why Muslims argued very much about what this means, and they brought a very ridiculous explanation. That Muhammad just wanted to say, everyone who lives now will be dead within 100 years, and that's it.
Can you actually provide us with a source, Ridwan, that says that Muslims have been arguing over this very much? They can easily understand that this hadith is referring to those people that are on the surface of the earth, because one of these hadiths says that those who are tonight found on the surface on the earth will not live for 100 years. It doesn't say that the world is going to end in 100 years. And the other hadith also says that those who are upon the earth are not going to live for another 100 years, or more than it, rather. This means that if somebody new comes to the earth, if somebody is born and a new generation is born, they will pass those 100 years because they weren't upon the earth before that. But you can't understand these simple logical things, can you, Ridwan? Because you do seem like that type of guy who probably passed his logic barely because he was bored in class.
Why would Muhammad just say something like that? What is the point of that? Why would Muhammad say, this is a very important night, because in 100 years you will be all dead, and then other people will live? Okay, that's not even true. It is virtually impossible that no one survived those 100 years, considering that we have always had people who live beyond 100 years, and we most definitely had them at that time as well. And the hadith also includes all creatures on the surface of the earth. And there are so many animals, so many creatures that live far beyond 100 years. Muhammad was clearly delusional, and he made a promise of the end of the world with numbers that never came. Why would Allah's favorite last prophet, who is fully guided by Allah, who is sent to wake up humankind and bring them the final message, the final guide by Allah, make such an empty doomsday promise, a failed promise, and leave it to his devout Muslim followers to reinterpret these failed prophecies?
So let me get this straight. What you're telling me, Ridwan, is that it is not impossible during the medieval ages for a person to be born in such tough conditions, by the way, when people would usually die when they're 50 or 60 or 70. And this was the peak age usually. And seeing somebody live for 100 years was very, very, very rare. Mind you, there was only one Sahabi that lived that much, according to certain hadiths. In any case, what you're trying to tell me is that a person has to be born on that night, right? Because that's the standard of the hadith. People who are on the surface of the earth in that night are not going to live for more than 100 years. So a person would have to be born on that same night and then live up to 100 or more years. Ridwan, back then, people were not born at such frequent rates as they are right now. And for such an occurrence to happen, that specifically on that night a baby would be born that is going to live up to 100 years or more, is seemingly impossible. But anyways, I'm busy arguing with a guy that thinks that the sun is static because related to the other parts of the solar system, it has to be static. Despite the fact that it's moving 220 kilometers per second. Anyways, back to actual studying. Assalamu alaikum.